You know that feeling when you walk away from maybe a conversation or just an interaction and you feel completely, well, drained.
Hmm. Like you've given too much away.
Exactly. Or maybe you're just constantly trying to figure out what people expect from you. In relationships, family, friends, work, even online sometimes.
Yeah, it feels like navigating these unspoken rules, these sort of invisible lines that are supposed to guide how we connect.
Invisible lines, right. And what's really interesting and maybe a bit worrying is how often those lines get blurred or ignored completely.
And that leads to all sorts of negative feelings, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And, pretty unhealthy relationship patterns start to form.
Precisely. And that's exactly what we're digging into today. The absolutely crucial importance of boundaries in all our relationships.
We've got some really good material here.
Yeah, we really do. It digs deep into what boundaries actually are and, importantly, how you can make them work for you.
It's not about building walls, is it?
No, not at all. Think of it more like creating, well, one source put it beautifully, like a selectively permeable membrane.
I like that. Allowing the good stuff in, connection, but protecting yourself too.
Right. Protecting your own well-being. It's about creating healthier connections.
And if you think about it, a central challenge for so many people is just that.
Yeah.
How do you maintain those healthy connections and a strong sense of who you are when life and relationships just feel so demanding?
Couldn't agree more. So the sources we're looking at today, they give a really full picture, from the basics of personal boundaries right through to how they impact mental health.
And I offer practical advice too
Right.
on how to actually set them.
Yes, absolutely. We'll explore the different kinds of boundaries because there are quite a few. And the idea is by the end of this, you'll have some real actionable insights.
So you can understand your own needs better.
Yeah, understand your needs, your limits, learn how to communicate them effectively, and hopefully feel less stressed and, more fulfilled in your interactions.
So kind of a direct route to understanding a really vital part of just being human and connecting with others.
Exactly. So, what's our mission here today? What are we really trying to equip you, the listener, with?
Well, I think the mission is pretty clear. It's to give you a solid understanding of what personal boundaries actually are,
Right. What they are, why they matter so much.
the different ways they show up in everyday life.
And this is the crucial part, how you can start setting and, importantly, maintaining them in your own life.
Okay, so let's jump right in. These invisible lines we keep talking about, what are they fundamentally?
Fundamentally, yeah. What's the core concept?
Okay, so at their heart, personal boundaries are exactly what you call them, invisible lines. They are the personal limits, the rules that we establish for ourselves within our relationship.
It's personal limits and rules.
Right. And these aren't just random rules. They're thought-out limits that define what we find acceptable and what we find unacceptable in how others behave towards us.
And also how we'll respond.
And crucially, yes, how we choose to respond when those lines are tested or crossed. You can think of them as invisible guideposts, helping us navigate social stuff with a bit more clarity.
So it's really about defining for ourselves, okay, this is okay with me and this is not okay, regarding how people treat us, and then deciding how we react.
Precisely. And our sources really stress that these boundaries aren't just about managing what happens outside of us. They're vital for defining who we are, our personal identity, and protecting our mental and emotional health.
So it's an internal thing, too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's so important to get this. Setting boundaries isn't about shutting people out. That selectively permeable membrane analogy really works.
Yeah, I like that one.
It lets in the connection you want, the intimacy, but it guards your core self.
Yeah.
Someone with healthy boundaries can say no confidently.
But still be open to real connection.
Exactly. Still open.
That's a great way to think about it. It's not being closed off. It's just being really clear about what works for you as an individual. And these aren't just for romantic partners, are they?
Oh, not at all. The need for boundaries is universal. It cuts across everything: romance, family, friends, colleagues, even how we interact online.
Any interaction, basically.
Any interaction with another person involves these lines, whether we're consciously thinking about them or not. They protect our physical space, our emotional space, our sense of self, and they help manage expectations everywhere.
It sounds like the best way is to try and set them up proactively, rather than waiting until someone's already stepped over the line.
Absolutely. I mean, we often realize we need a boundary after it's been crossed, right?
Yeah, that's usually when the alarm bells go off.
But they work best proactively. If you consciously define and communicate your limits before major issues pop up, you can manage expectations up front and cut down on misunderstandings and conflict later.
So shaping healthier interactions from the get-go.
Exactly. intentionally.
Okay, so we've got a handle on what boundaries are, but let's dig into the why. Why are they so incredibly important? What's really at stake if we don't have healthy ones?
Right. And this is where it gets really, really crucial. And you see the true impact. Healthy boundaries aren't just, a nice little extra. They are fundamental pillars,
Pillars supporting what?
supporting both our psychological well-being and the health, and frankly, the longevity of our relationships. Their influence is huge.
Okay, let's start with the internal piece first. How do healthy boundaries directly impact our mental health?
Well, the link is incredibly strong. People who have clear, well-maintained personal limits, they consistently report lower stress levels, higher self-esteem.
Really, lower stress.
Definitely. Think of boundaries like mental health armor. They shield us from excessive demand, from taking on other people's negative emotions, from disrespectful treatment.
All the things that cause major stress.
Exactly. All major contributors to stress
Mm.
and things that can really increase the risk of issues like depression or burnout.
So just the act of setting a boundary is almost like a profound act of mental self-care.
Precisely. Defining and asserting what's acceptable for you reflects a basic sense of self-worth. When you value yourself enough to actively protect your time, your energy, your emotional space,
Your self-esteem goes up.
your self-esteem, your self-respect, they naturally increase. And that gives you a stronger sense of personal control over your life, which is absolutely vital for psychological resilience, for well-being.
And the flip side, if you don't have clear boundaries,
Then you can end up feeling constantly overwhelmed, right?
Mm.
Emotionally drained, perpetually stressed because your own needs just aren't being acknowledged or met.
and it sounds like there's a potential for a really positive cycle here.
Absolutely there is. The act of setting a boundary, which, requires valuing yourself to some degree, can actually give your self-esteem a real boost.
How does that work?
Well, when you successfully set and maintain these limits, you feel more competent, more in control of managing your life and relationships.
Right, a sense of self-efficacy.
Exactly. And that reinforced self-esteem creates this positive feedback loop. It makes it easier, more natural to keep setting and upholding the boundaries you need going forward.
Okay, that makes sense for our internal world. Now, let's shift focus to our connections with other people. How do boundaries play out in the health of our relationships?
They're truly foundational for healthy, thriving relationships. They provide the essential framework
A framework for what exactly?
for mutual understanding, deep respect, and genuine connection. Clear boundaries foster mutual respect because they communicate your values, your needs, how you want to be treated.
So when someone respects your boundary, they're showing they value you.
Exactly. And when these limits are clear and consistently honored, trust deepens over time.
Okay, trust. That's huge.
And this mutual respect and understanding create a much safer, more supportive space for authentic self-expression. You feel much more secure sharing your true thoughts, your feelings, your vulnerabilities when you trust your boundaries will be respected.
So paradoxically, boundaries can actually lead to more intimacy.
Yes. It seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? You'd think boundaries create distance,
Right.
but they actually create the safety needed for true closeness to develop. When we feel safe, secure, when our autonomy is respected, we're far more willing to be emotionally vulnerable and open, and that leads to deeper, more meaningful connections.
That's a really powerful point. It flips the common assumption on its head.
It does. And boundaries also play a critical role in navigating conflict.
How so?
By clarifying expectations for behavior, defining what's acceptable and what's not, they reduce the chance of misunderstandings, which are often the spark that ignites conflict in the first place.
Okay, so fewer misunderstandings.
And when disagreements do happen, because they inevitably do, having those pre-established boundaries gives you a framework for dealing with them more respectfully and constructively.
And I noticed in the source material, boundaries were called an antidote to resentment. Can you unpack that a bit?
Yeah, that's a great phrase. Resentment often builds up slowly when our basic needs aren't met, or when we feel repeatedly taken advantage of or disrespected.
That slow burn feeling.
Exactly. So by empowering you to clearly state your limits, protect your time and energy, and ensure your own needs are acknowledged, boundaries actively prevent that toxic buildup of resentment.
So it's not just about avoiding fights in the moment.
No, it's about nurturing the long-term health, the satisfaction, the sustainability of the relationship itself.
Okay, so we've got a solid grasp on what boundaries are and why they're so vital, but it's clear they're not all the same, right? There are different types we need to think about.
Absolutely. Personal boundaries aren't just one big thing. They show up in different forms, each protecting a different aspect of ourselves and our personal space.
And understanding these different types helps us figure out our own needs better.
Exactly. It's key for self-awareness and for setting more effective, targeted boundaries. We can group them into categories like uh, physical, material, emotional, intellectual, sexual, time, digital, and workplace boundaries.
All right, let's break those down. Starting with physical boundaries, what do those cover?
Okay, physical boundaries are all about our physical body, our personal space, and our comfort levels with touch and closeness to others.
So, who can touch us? How close people can stand?
Right. Who can touch us, how, when, and the physical distance we need to feel comfortable in different situations. A simple example, preferring a handshake over a hug with someone new.
Or needing more space in a crowded room?
Exactly. Violations can be anything from unwanted touching to someone just standing uncomfortably close.
Got it. Okay, what about material boundaries?
Material boundaries concern our stuff, our possessions. Things like money, our home, car, personal belongings.
So, deciding what we lend or share.
Yes, and under what conditions. For instance, you might have a boundary about how someone treats your camper if they borrow it.
Like, bring it back clean.
Right. Or maybe deciding not to lend money to a particular friend. That's a material boundary. Violations could be someone damaging your things or pressuring you to lend or give something when you don't want to.
Okay, moving inward a bit, what about emotional boundaries?
Emotional boundaries are really about protecting our emotional well-being, our emotional energy.
How does that work?
It involves recognizing and honoring your own feelings, deciding what personal stuff, what vulnerable emotions you share and with whom, and crucially, understanding you're not responsible for managing other people's emotions.
That's a big one, not being responsible for how others feel.
It is. Emotional boundaries also define how others can speak to you and treat you emotionally. Saying name-calling isn't okay during an argument. That's an emotional boundary.
Or not letting someone constantly dump their problems on you without asking.
Exactly. Preventing that emotional contagion where you absorb others' negativity. A key thing here is realizing that if you take on their emotions, you can't properly process your own.
Right. We're each in charge of our own emotional world. Okay, intellectual boundaries.
Intellectual boundaries relate to our thoughts, ideas, opinions, beliefs. They cover our right to have our own thoughts and have them treated respectfully, even if someone disagrees.
So respecting differences of opinion.
Yes, and also being aware of what topics are appropriate for different situations or people. Maybe politely bowing out of a heated political debate if you're not comfortable.
Or expecting your ideas at work to be considered, not just dismissed immediately.
Precisely. Violations happen when someone belittles your thoughts, ridicules your beliefs, or constantly interrupts and dismisses what you say.
Then there are sexual boundaries. These seem especially vital and need clear communication.
Absolutely crucial. Sexual boundaries cover the emotional, intellectual, and physical aspects of sexuality. They're all about mutual understanding, respect, and enthusiastic ongoing consent.
Consent is key.
Always. These boundaries define your comfort levels with different types of sexual touch, activities, discussions about sex. Having an honest talk with a partner about what you're comfortable with before intimacy is a critical example. Violations are serious, any unwanted contact or pressure.
Okay, let's talk about managing our resources. Time boundaries.
Time boundaries are about how we consciously choose to allocate and protect our time and our limited energy.
So saying no to things that drain our time.
Yes. Setting limits on others' demands on our time, making sure we reserve enough time for our own needs, work, relationships, rest, hobbies.
Like deciding how long you'll wait for someone who's always late.
That's one example. Or declining overtime when you're swamped. Or even setting limits on phone call lengths. Violations are when someone constantly demands too much of your time without regard for your schedule.
And in our super connected world, digital boundaries feel more important than ever.
Oh, absolutely vital. Digital boundaries manage our online presence and interactions.
Like screen time limits.
Screen time limits, yes. But also rules for social media time, the content we engage with, our communication styles online, privacy settings.
Turning off notifications.
That's a big one. Designating tech-free periods. Being mindful of how much personal info you share. It's crucial to see that constant connectivity often creates a false sense of urgency.
Right, not every message needs an instant reply.
Exactly. Violations can include online harassment, sharing private info without permission, or expecting instant responses 24/7.
And finally, workplace boundaries.
Also critical for productivity, professionalism, and just general well-being at work.
So managing workload.
managing workload,
Yeah.
defining and sticking to working hours, clarifying your role and responsibilities, keeping personal and professional chat separate, ensuring respectful communication.
Saying no to tasks outside your job description.
That's a key one. Or clearly stating your start and end times. Violations might be constant demands for unpaid overtime or colleagues asking intrusive personal questions.
Wow, that's a really thorough breakdown of the different types. And like you said earlier, they often seem to overlap, don't they?
Exactly. They're interconnected. For example, a colleague standing too close that's physical, while also making unreasonable demands emotional and time shows how they link up.
So you need to see the whole picture.
Right. Understanding that connection is crucial for tackling boundary issues effectively.
And while how we express them might change depending on the situation.
The core principles stay the same.
Yes. Self-respect, safety, autonomy, those are constant, right?
Hmm?
Even if the specifics vary by context, relationship, culture.
Precisely. It's about developing, let's call it boundary intelligence, the skill to apply these core ideas flexibly and appropriately.
Boundary intelligence, I like that. Okay, so we know what they are, why they matter, the different types. Now, the really practical stuff. How do we actually develop the skills to set these boundaries effectively?
Okay, the art of boundary setting really starts with deep self-awareness.
Yeah.
You can't communicate your limits if you don't understand them yourself first.
So step one is looking inward.
Yes. Regular self-reflection, identifying your core needs, your values, what's genuinely important to you, and your emotional triggers.
Triggers, like situations that always make you feel uncomfortable or resentful.
Exactly. Those things that consistently push your buttons. A helpful exercise can be making a boundary inventory. Basically, listing specific situations or interactions that usually leave you feeling negative. Or maybe keeping a journal about times you felt your boundaries were crossed.
To spot patterns.
Right, to see where you consistently need firmer limits. And it's absolutely vital to learn to trust your feelings, your gut instincts.
Our bodies often tell us, don't they?
They really do. Our bodies and emotions send clear signals when a boundary is being pushed or crossed. Regularly asking yourself, how am I feeling right now and why? Helps build that internal awareness.
And knowing why a boundary matters helps you assert it.
Definitely. Understanding the why behind it makes asserting it feel much more authentic and easier to stick with.
Okay, so we've done the self-reflection, we have a better sense of our needs. How do we actually communicate these boundaries clearly to others?
That's where assertiveness comes in. It's widely seen as the most effective style for this.
Assertiveness, not aggression, not passivity.
Exactly. Aggression violates others' rights. Passivity ignores your own. Assertiveness is expressing your thoughts, feelings, needs clearly, directly, respectfully, confidently, while also respecting the other person's rights and perspective.
It's that balance. And statements are a key tool here, right?
They really are. Instead of saying, you always interrupt me, which sounds accusatory.
Puts them on the defensive immediately.
Right. You focus on your experience. I feel frustrated when I'm interrupted and I need to finish my thought. It's generally less likely to make the other person feel attacked, more likely they'll actually hear you.
And be specific.
Be specific, unambiguous, leave little room for doubt, and your body language matters too. Eye contact, a calm, firm tone, it all reinforces the message.
No, one thing loads of people struggle with is just saying no. It sounds simple, but it can feel incredibly hard. How do we get better at that?
It is hard, but being able to confidently say no to requests that cross your limits is absolutely crucial.
Why is it so difficult? Fear of disappointing people, guilt.
All of the above. Fear of disappointment, needing to please, feeling guilty for prioritizing yourself. But you have to remember, you have the right to decline. And often, no is a complete sentence.
You don't always need a long explanation.
No, you really don't. Brief explanations are okay sometimes, but not always needed. Be direct, be clear. Avoid wishy-washy language that leaves the door open if you've already decided. Learning to say no assertively without excessive guilt is a huge step in reclaiming your personal power.
And it's not a one-time thing, is it? You set a boundary, but then you have to stick to it.
Absolutely. Consistency is the cornerstone. If you're inconsistent, you send mixed signals. People might think your limits aren't serious or can be pushed.
Undermines the whole thing.
Completely. Your actions need to match your words. If you say you don't take work calls after 6 p.m., you have to actually not take them.
And if someone tests it,
Calmly and clearly restate the boundary. Repetition helps people learn and respect your limits over time.
okay, so we've got the principles, the skills. Let's see how this plays out in different areas of life, starting with romantic partnerships.
Right. In romance, Boundaries are essential for balancing intimacy with autonomy, respecting each other's need for personal space, time for individual interests, alongside couple time, separate identities.
Emotional boundaries seem huge here too.
Critical. Managing how feelings are shared, ensuring one partner's mood doesn't constantly dictate the other's. And of course, physical and sexual boundaries are paramount based on comfort, communication, ongoing consent.
And avoiding extremes, like being too distant or too enmeshed.
Exactly. Avoiding being too rigid, which creates distance, or too porous, where you lose yourself. And importantly, relationships change, so couples need to revisit and renegotiate boundaries over time.
Okay. What about families? That often feels like the trickiest area, with all the history and ingrained habits.
You're right, family dynamics often come with deep-seated expectations and patterns that make boundaries tough.
But still crucial.
Absolutely crucial. For respecting individual privacy, autonomy in decisions, emotional and physical space. This might mean setting limits on unsolicited advice,
Oh, yeah, that's a common one.
or managing financial expectations, defining respectful communication. For adult children, setting healthy boundaries with parents as they build their own lives is a really important step.
Makes sense. And friendships. How do boundaries work there?
In healthy friendships, boundaries protect your identity and space, ensure the relationship is reciprocal, not one-sided or draining.
So not being the constant confidant for someone else's drama.
Right. Managing expectations around emotional support, respecting different values without judgment, making sure time together works for both people, not just one. And also recognizing when a friendship consistently violates your boundaries and maybe needing to step back.
Okay. And the workplace. Boundaries there seem key for avoiding burnout.
Definitely. Professional boundaries are vital for productivity, well-being, and a respectful environment. Managing workload, sticking to work hours, clarifying roles, separating personal and professional chat, ensuring respectful communication.
Like we talked about saying no to tasks outside your scope.
Exactly. Or setting clear limits on availability outside work hours. These are key workplace boundaries.
And then online interactions. The digital world.
With everything being online, setting digital boundaries is more critical than ever for mental health, time, and privacy. Setting limits on screen time, curating content you engage with, managing privacy settings, having tech-free periods.
It's deciding how much you share online.
Yes, and setting realistic expectations for response times, not feeling pressured to be instantly available.
It really sounds like those core skills, self-awareness, assertiveness, consistency, they just apply everywhere, don't they?
They absolutely do. And it's also about that contextual intelligence we mentioned, understanding the unique dynamics, power imbalances, expectations in each specific situation, and adapting your approach.
And the permeability of boundaries, how flexible or rigid they are, says a lot about the health of the relationship.
It can be a big indicator. Healthy relationships have flexible but clear boundaries. Dysfunctional patterns like codependency or enmeshment often involve boundaries that are way too porous or non-existent.
That's a really crucial point. So how can we tell if our own boundaries or lack of them are actually unhealthy? What are the warning signs?
That self-reflection is so important. Unhealthy boundaries usually show up at the extremes, either too porous or too rigid.
Okay, let's look at porous first. What are the signs someone's boundaries might be too porous, too open?
Porous boundaries often mean difficulty saying no, oversharing personal stuff too soon or with the wrong people, getting way too involved in others' problems.
To the point it harms you.
Yes, to your own detriment. Also, tolerating disrespect or even abuse, needing constant approval from others, feeling responsible for everyone else's feelings.
Neglecting your own needs in the process.
Exactly. Neglecting your own needs, finding it hard to make decisions because you're trying to please everyone, it leads to feeling overwhelmed, drained, taken advantage of. Codependency is often linked to this.
Okay. And the other end, rigid boundaries.
Rigid boundaries mean keeping excessive distance emotionally or physically, usually to avoid vulnerability or getting hurt.
So keeping people at arm's length.
Right. Being hesitant or unwilling to share personal info, even with close people, struggling to ask for help, often seeming detached, emotionally unavailable, inflexible. It feels protective, maybe, but it hinders intimacy and real connection.
What about when our boundaries are just being ignored or stomped on by others? What are the red flags for boundary violations?
Clear signs include feeling consistently disrespected, uncomfortable, or even unsafe with certain people. Look for patterns of coercion, manipulation, like guilt tripping or gaslighting.
Gaslighting making you doubt your own reality.
Exactly. Also, disregard for your privacy, Having your decisions constantly challenged or overridden, being interrupted repeatedly, having your needs dismissed, these are strong signals your boundaries aren't respected.
Are there general behaviors we might notice in ourselves that hint at underlying boundary issues?
Yes, definitely. Things like consistently feeling overwhelmed or drained after socializing, really struggling to say no even when you want to, feeling resentful towards others often.
Passive aggression, maybe?
Yes, using passive aggression to express unmet needs. Also, feeling confused about your own identity or needs, or frequently feeling like a victim in your relationships or life.
And it sounds like these unhealthy dynamics can sometimes just feel normal, right? If that's what you grew up with or what's accepted in your workplace or social group.
Exactly. In some families, workplaces, even cultures, unhealthy boundary patterns can become so ingrained they're just seen as normal, even expected. That makes it incredibly hard for people within those systems to see them as harmful or feel okay asserting their own needs without facing backlash.
So, what are the consequences if we consistently lack healthy boundaries for us as individuals and for our relationships?
The consequences are significant, really far-reaching. Individually, you're looking at chronic overwhelm, stress, emotional exhaustion, burnout.
Leading to bigger mental health issues.
It can definitely contribute to or worsen things like anxiety and depression. And it can even show up physically: insomnia, headaches, digestive problems,
And in relationships.
misunderstandings, resentment building up, more conflict, trust erodes. Relationships can become toxic manipulation, control, a loss of individuality for the person with weaker boundaries. Some research even links unaddressed boundary issues to chronic health problems, suggesting it's part of overall well-being.
It's so clear why they're important, but actually doing it, setting and maintaining them can feel incredibly difficult. What makes it so tough? What are the common obstacles?
Yeah, it's often a mix of internal and external hurdles. Internally, there's often a deep fear of conflict, fear of rejection or abandonment if we assert ourselves.
Guilt, too.
Huge amounts of guilt. Feeling selfish for prioritizing your own needs. And self-doubt, questioning if you even have the right to have boundaries. These are really common internal barriers.
And our past experiences must play a big role, too. Our upbringing.
Oh, profoundly. Past experiences, especially childhood and early relationships, shape our ability to set boundaries now. Trauma, for instance, often involves major boundary violations.
Leaving you feeling powerless.
Exactly. And that can lead to developing extreme boundary styles later, either super rigid or super porous as a coping mechanism. Codependency, often rooted in difficult childhoods, is basically defined by a lack of healthy boundaries, prioritizing others to your own detriment.
Even just being a people pleaser.
Even learned habits like people-pleasing or fawning, trying to appease others to feel safe, can make it incredibly hard to say no or assert your limits.
What about pressures from outside? From other people or society?
Externally, you might face manipulation from people who benefit from your lack of boundaries. They might use guilt-tripping, emotional blackmail, even gaslighting to keep things as they are.
And some people just react badly when you set limits.
Toxic individuals might react with anger, denial, try to blame you, and broader cultural influences matter too. Some collectivist cultures emphasize group harmony, which can sometimes clash with asserting individual boundaries, making you feel selfish. It's often this complex mix of internal fears and external pressures that makes it so challenging.
Okay, so let's say we've gathered our courage, we've set a boundary, but then someone tests it or just ignores it. How do we stand firm? How do we enforce it?
Right, enforcement is key. When a boundary is crossed, the first step is usually to calm and clearly restate it.
Just say it again.
Yes. Repetition, like a broken record, can be surprisingly effective. And remember, you're responsible for communicating your boundary, but you are not responsible for their emotional reaction to it.
That's hard, but important to remember.
Very. Be specific about the behavior that's unacceptable. And if it keeps happening, despite clear communication, you need to be ready to state the consequences of continued disrespect.
When is it okay to be flexible, though? And when do you absolutely have to hold the line? And what if someone still doesn't respect it?
Good questions. Some boundaries might allow for flexibility depending on the context, the relationship, the situation. Maybe working late occasionally for a critical project, as long as your core needs and values aren't compromised.
But some are non-negotiable.
Boundaries tied to your core values, your safety, your fundamental well-being, those should generally be non-negotiable. Think abuse, dishonesty. You need to clearly communicate these non-negotiable limits and the consequences if they're crossed.
And if someone consistently disrespects even those clear boundaries?
Then you have to seriously reevaluate the relationship's health. It might mean limiting contact or even ending the relationship to protect yourself. How people respond when you set and force boundaries tells you a lot about the respect and health of that relationship.
It's like a litmus test.
It really is.
Yeah.
Persistent violations often point to deeper issues you might not be able to fix. And enforcing boundaries takes real emotional strength and courage. Having support friends, professionals, can be incredibly helpful.
This has been incredibly insightful, a really comprehensive look at boundaries. As we wrap up, what are the main takeaways, the core ideas you'd want listeners to really hold on to?
I think the core ideas are healthy boundaries are absolutely essential for your own mental and emotional health and for creating and keeping healthy, fulfilling relationships.
They define our limits, protect us.
Right. Define limits, protect well-being, foster mutual respect. Remember, there are different types of boundaries, and learning to recognize them, articulate them, communicate them assertively is a fundamental life skill.
And it's an ongoing process.
It's ongoing. It takes self-awareness, clear communication, consistency, and yeah, acknowledging you'll probably face challenges, internal and external.
And ultimately, embracing this journey towards healthy boundaries is really about living a more authentic, empowered life, isn't it?
Exactly. It's fundamentally an act of self-care, a show of self-respect, and it's the foundation for building more genuine, meaningful connections.
So for you, our listener, maybe take a moment now to reflect. Is there one area in your life where you feel a need for a clearer, healthier boundary?
Yeah, maybe think about that.
And here's a question to mull over this week. What's one small, concrete step you can take to honor your own limits and needs in a relationship that feels challenging right now?
Just one small step.
Yeah. And as you try it, pay attention. Notice how you feel, and maybe observe how others react. It can be really revealing.
And remember, this deep dive, it's really just the start of what can be a transformative journey. Keep exploring this.
Through more self-reflection.
Self-reflection, maybe talking honestly with people you trust, or seeking out more resources if you feel you need them. Setting and maintaining boundaries is a continuous path of self-discovery and growth in all our relationships.